As Mahmood would tell you, we saw a stage that looked like more ready for a walima, right? It was this regal sofa. And I said, well, that's really not the look that we want. Our idea with these fireside conversations is really a chance to be unplugged and for our speakers to really share with the audience. One of the things that I've observed in my 30 years in this country is that when I got here, and many of you got here, we really didn't have mentors. We sort of struggled and found our way. And one of the best things that we can do for our next generation is to provide them a perspective from where we stand. So I'm going to get us going, and then we really want this to be more participative. I wanted to get as many of your questions in here. Mahmood asked me last night, what do you want me to talk about? And I said, well, instead of me deciding what you should talk about or you deciding what you should talk about, he can speak about lots of subjects. Let's make this a participative, driven thing. But perhaps to get started, maybe I would ask Mahmood this. If you knew then what you know now, what would you have done?
Done differently?
Done differently, if anything.
If I could go back, I had a very traditional technical education in science. The usual study science, pre-med. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I had a very traditional science-based education. Grew up in England. I've never actually lived in Pakistan. I'm a second generation Pakistani, so I can relate to many young people in this room, just a generation earlier. But the education was classical, focus on science, focus on math, go to medical school. Everything that you can imagine Desi parents ask their children to do, I was told to do. I choose my words carefully. I didn't choose to do, I was told to do. If I could change that, I would probably go back and study and expose myself to a lot more non-science, expose myself to arts, history, all of the things that I think are more about education than training. Science and medicine is training. It's not an education. The education is everything outside science and medicine. Never got that chance. Try to make up for it. Let your children's minds explore. It's very important.
So, that's great advice, and that hit us pretty close to heart last year when our son, who trained in finance, was working for a bank. He decided he wanted to be in the world of entertainment. So he quits, and he goes, Dad, I want to do this. So I had a quandary, Mahmood. The feedback and wisdom is let the kids follow and do what they want to do, but here's a father's heart saying, oh my dear God, what is this boy doing? So what do we say to our children who want to pursue those paths? Do we want to encourage them, or do we want to provide them with some mentored guidance?
And you can look this up on YouTube. About 4 years ago, I had the privilege and honor of giving the commencement speech at the University of Minnesota. Large school. The title of my talk, my speech, was The Necessity to be an Intellectual Nomad. Chose the title very carefully. We all know what nomadic people do, but being an intellectual nomad is the critical thing. Let your mind wander, take risks, go to places that haven't been explored before. Let this next generation actually do that. Don't guide them to places in their mind that you think they should go to, because that's where you either have been or because you couldn't go yourself, so you thought, I want to make it up in your children. The world has changed in a generation. It is changing in 2 generations. And that nomadic intellect will actually gain them experiences that they can carry on themselves. Our job as mentors, parents, grandparents, is to help them focus their energy, but not decide where their energy actually gets spent. Not the same thing. You don't want them not focusing at some point, but don't tell them what to focus on.
Well said. Well, let's open this up. What do you want to ask of Mahmood? Come on. All right. Bring a microphone.
I think,
Yeah,
first.
I think the gentleman in the back.
Hi, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here. I just wanted to get your perspective on how do you see healthcare shaping with all these forces coming in, where it is heading, where are the opportunities, where you see the risks, and like general picture you can give with your experience, like where all these entrepreneurs should focus their energies on, what's the cutting edge.
Look, let me touch on some of those. This is a very broad question that technology is shaping our healthcare system around the world. Let me first talk about the challenges to be solved, because if you actually don't think about this as challenges, then you don't look for the opportunities, right? Challenges are not there to be problems, they're there to create the opportunities. We have a global population that's rising, no question. Hidden behind this change in the world, other than the fact that we're getting a very rapidly increasing middle class, which is a good thing, therefore they have spending power, they will demand healthcare, but not by the rules the US and Western Europe have defined. The emerging world will have economic and healthcare models which will be very different from ours. The biggest increase, of course, will be megacities, of which the Western world will only have two. But only. All the others will be in Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South America. Central and South America. So we're going to be dealing with the demographic change geographically, which is very different from what we know today. The second, which is a subject that's been dear to my heart for quite a while, actually in it. This is the first time in the history of mankind on the planet today on a model that the next generation takes care of the past generation. Medicare, National Health Service, Canadian health system, Asian, those are the workers who are going to be, in theory, paying for the past generation. There isn't an insurance system, a financial system, or a health system, which comes back then, if you understand what I just said.
The rest of us will either be retired, bankrupt, or a combination of those.
That's a depressing thought.
Okay? So now, as entrepreneurs, because I want to focus this on where you're thinking about taking your business, what are the business opportunities that are going to succeed? And simply having a business that's providing care as service businesses actually won't be sufficient because there won't be the finances to support your service business. Does that make sense? So we actually have to think about business not only as support, but models that work. Now let me give you some examples of how the emerging world is actually leapfrogging the so-called developed world. China recognized a while back that it doesn't have the number of ophthalmologists it needs to take care of 1.5 billion people. But you can take a picture of the back of the eye. And you can take 6 or 7 digital pictures, and with storage capacity and transmission, transmitting images and storing them is nothing. So basically, they took a technology that was actually developed in Toronto and at McGill, University of Toronto and McGill, where they use AI to actually translate those images with great precision. And now, China has about 100 patients screened by a computer, and for every 100 or so, one is actually validated by a physician. So the delivery vehicle has actually become a digital physician. Now, before you medical dies, and I'm licensed just like the rest of the potential physicians around here, this year, for the first time, a computer was actually asked to take the American board exam in medicine. And it scored higher than the students who were actually taking the medical board exam. A computer has outscored in the medical boards. The computer was trained on about 300 textbooks, and on about 3 million research papers. There isn't a human that I know can learn 300 textbooks and 3 million research papers. Computer did. It was taught language processing so it could read narrative in a medical history. And I'm not talking about checklists, actual medical history as a narrative, interpreted it, translated it, and took the exam and passed. Do you see where this is going? So it isn't just radiology and digital. This is now getting into cognitive. Why do I say this? Because in the emerging world, they won't have a choice. There will be new systems. Imagine Pakistan. How many Pakistani doctors actually could pass the American board exam? Let's ask that question. Don't answer it. Let's ask that question. Now imagine a business model in Pakistan. Now let me take that one step further. Imagine behind Google saying, "Okay, Google," or "Alexa, I have a headache." With the power of Google and Amazon behind Alexa and Google Home, or whatever is.
Very
You can
timely.
imagine this is what, so I hope that gives you the context of how rapidly this is happening. Other questions?
Right, so we've talked about being an intellectual nomad. We've got some predictions on healthcare. I see a hand back there. Who's next? Okay,
Assalamu
Mr.
alaikum.
Lakhani.
Alaikum salam.
How are you, sir?
I'm good, thank
How
you.
was your stay last night at our hotel?
Awesome.
All right.
I wish you could have
mean,
done something about the weather, too.
Well, I will if you give me an answer about your past experience dealing with raising capital. I talked to you briefly yesterday, and I thought I
Great
was
question.
curious to know that you really did a very good job successfully in Series 6 or Series C, about 150 million. So what are some of your past experiences or lessons learned for an entrepreneur like me so I can be on Wall Street someday? I'm a dreamer, that's what I'm asking.
Well, I'm still trying to grow up. Look, I've had the fortune of being on the funding side and on the fundraising side as a CEO company that I was one of the early board members of Indigo Ag, where we were the 7th unicorn coming out of Boston. And so there's a few simple rules, or what do investors want to really invest in? And I like to keep this simple. 2 days ago, I was a visiting professor at McGill's Business School. Same question. Keep it simple. 3 things. Do you have a differentiated idea? Is it really differentiated? Or is this another Me Too? You know, it's a nuance, it's a twist of something. If you have a differentiated idea, you're well on your way. The second is, do you understand the domain within which this idea is going to actually get deployed? That's where most entrepreneurs actually have a hiccup. They think they understand the domain, but the domain of application is the most complex to understand. There are regulators, stakeholders, there's government, there's rules, there's licensing, there's city, there's state, there's government. All of those things apply in the domain, and there can be specific to the business that you're in. It could be energy, health, doesn't matter. But really, do you understand that domain? And if you do, you're going to succeed. I'll give you an example when you fail. Apple, people think, never fails. Apple was the most advanced personal digital assistant ever developed. Anybody here old enough to remember the Apple Newton? Come on, admit it. Okay? Apple Newton was better than any personal assistant at the time, going back to the 90s. It bombed. Wasn't because of the differentiated technologies, Apple's technology. Why did it fail? Because they underestimated the complexity of the domain. There were no app systems, there were no softwares developed for it, the system wasn't ready for it. Who killed Apple Newton? Palm Pilot. Very, very simple technology relative to Apple Newton, but they had the domain right. The third is, do you have a financial and operating model that makes sense? Do you have a revenue basis? Will you actually get scalable? If you've been reading what's been happening in the news around Uber and all these companies, guess what? The days of this star CEO suddenly telling you, trust me, we're going to make money, and we're just going to scale, is no longer sufficient. The Wall Street no longer buys that. 2018 saw the largest number of CEOs asked to step down in the history of Wall Street. So there's a lesson there. Underlying all of this, do you really have the management team that can take you there? Often, it's not the entrepreneur that put the company together. It's a very different skill set to found a company than to scale it. And more often than not, the founders no longer get the chance to scale the company. Uber, I can go through the list. Founders have a certain skill set. The executives that really understand scaling systems are very different. Do not underestimate that part. You need both. I hope that answers your question.
You know, what I, thank you. I'm always impressed with Mahmood's ability. I think the term is a polymath, that he covers the waterfront on so many different domains. I don't know how he does it, but somehow he does. And we've already seen that in the 3 questions. Take us in another direction. Yes, go ahead, please.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
With your expertise in medicine and as a CEO of Life Biosciences, I have a question for you. Our current problem which we are facing is all these pharmacy companies, they are giving us all these medications, and they are not directed directly towards the problem which we are having, medical problems. There are side effects. People are becoming addicted to those drugs. What are the solutions you see in the future? Can those be made so they can be targeted without or minimizing the side effects? So every time you go for a prescription, customized prescription is made for you. So have you done any research on that, or is that the direction you're going?
So I haven't done research on that. Let me give you my perspective. So I don't agree totally with your characterization. Let me explain why I say that. If you actually step back and go beyond the headlines and beyond the sound bites, let's look at the medical, health, and pharmaceutical industry over a 100-year time horizon. And it's always important as a leader to maintain where you're steering the ship and not let a very local change steer you in a different direction. Medicine and the pharmaceutical industry have given you antibiotics that have probably saved more lives than any other drug. It was only around World War II that people would die from a strep throat and get rheumatic heart disease and all the complications of streptococcal infection across Pakistan. The commonest cardiovascular procedure used to be valve replacement for rheumatic heart disease, which was secondary to strep infection. Have any doctor seen rheumatic heart disease in the last 10 years or 20 years in this country? I would probably say no. There was a time in medicine when you got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, you were dead within 12 months. It was 100% mortality. Today, it's almost unheard of. So I can go on and on. So let us not characterize. Those are all life-saving, happened. Many of us know cancer patients who survived because of their immunotherapy, chemotherapy, etc. Right? So let's put that aside. 80-some% of drugs prescribed in this country are generic. They're nothing to do with development of the pharmaceutical industry. They're generic, they don't make profits. They're coming from Israel, India, China as bulk manufacturing. Most of Pakistan's pharmaceutical industry is actually generics. So now let's look to the future and say, where's this innovation going to come? The challenge with the next wave of innovation is a tension between the cost versus the opportunity. Scale allows you to bring costs down. When you get to customization, you eliminate the scale part of the formula. And as you eliminate the scale part of the formula, the trade-off becomes you actually have fewer and fewer patients to recoup the same development costs. Because your fixed variable, and I don't know anything about finance, but a few terms that
That's not true, by the way.
I've heard here and there. But if your fixed costs remain approximately the same, the number of units that you actually have to sell have to recoup those costs. It's that simple. And guess what? With personalized, customized medicine, it is as much a technical problem as a business operating problem. And so that's why I said earlier, unless we figure out different operating models, remember the 3 things I mentioned? Differentiated technology, domain knowledge, and your business operating model? The problem is that third one. And it's very important for the technologists to actually partner with entrepreneurs who understand the operating model and bridge this, which is why people like yourself have to partner with the technologists if we're going to crack this. One of the things I do as a CEO and in all of my former life, is I find the skill set that I really need to solve, and it isn't the technologists. That's not the missing part of the equation. Most of the time, that's just the start. So we can go on in this. This is a critical part of how you have to think about technology as an industry as opposed to IT or service industries. These are very complex technologies. Other question?
Excellent. Go ahead.
A young woman right there.
There's a lady over here in the front. Can we run it? Yes. By the way, for those who are skeptical, if you recall, I put a message out there a few days ago, and I said, if you don't find value in the day, we will give you a complimentary.
Assalamu alaikum. I just want to go back to the original question that Amir, you had asked. You were asked about, technical skills as opposed to education, and you said, where we're lacking as a community is real education as opposed to technical skills and training. I want you to talk a little bit more about having soft skills as well. Because in our community, we see a lot of people with a lot of technical skills, but when it comes to people skills, communication skills, presentation skills, we're lacking and we're far behind. And I would like you to spend a few minutes talking about that.
Look, communication, in my mind, has three facets. One, of course, is clarity, right? And that gets into accents and all that. Some of that you can change, some of it you can't. But it has to be clear. The second is communication is not only sending a message, but making sure somebody received the message. Now, why do I say that? Email, texting is some of the worst communication that you can ever imagine. An old teacher of mine said sending an email to somebody is a bit like listening to the opera without the music. You read the words, you have no understanding of the emotion, and that's what you're getting at.
There's no dimension to it, yeah.
There's really no context to it either. And so you have to actually learn those skills. You have to be in an environment where you're taught those skills. And those don't happen taking a mathematics class. They don't happen taking a physics class or a physiology class. How many medical students are actually trained how to debate? I wasn't. Maybe now they are, but I wasn't. How many electrical engineering classes are around debating an issue? Most of the time was spent memorizing a lot of facts and seeing if you could answer the multiple choice question. Right? So that's the soft skills. That happens through active engagement, mentoring, etc. Why is that necessary in college? Let me give you, some of you may be shocked, there was a quote that said, the era of electronic communication is the end of college campuses. Do you know when that was written? Somebody take a guess. It was nothing to do with the internet. It was after Alexander Graham Bell had just invented the telephone. When the telephone was invented, everybody at that time, the gurus wrote, the college campus era is over. 100 years ago. Then we heard about it through television and on TV. Remember Open University? And then we heard about it through the internet and MOOCs and all of this. Meanwhile, the value of human engagement in that education and soft skills continues to actually increase in importance, not decrease. We need to engage in that, even as technologists, because, and I'll end with an example. I had the privilege and honor recently, a few months ago, to be invited as one of the 3 presenters to testify to the US Congressional Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. It's actually a matter of pride that they've identified 3 individuals in the country who are considered the leaders to present to Congress, and one of them Pakistani Muslim. You know? Fox News never reports that part.
Of course not.
Let alone the fact that the US Council that addresses universities, CEOs, and the national laboratories, the chairman is a Pakistani. Never would we have envisioned that. We'll come back to that. But in order to do those roles, it's nothing about facts. It's how can you engage and influence these policymakers, our country's leaders, and take them to a place where you feel is important. That is why you need to influence people. Those are the influencing skills. Those happen through dialogue and engagement. All too often, we miss that. Next question.
I think it was, thank you. Mahmood.
So, I tech and I work in that industry, so I completely agree with that. My question is, if I keep the, drugs and the whole aspects of medical treatment aside, I see that in research, a lot of it is also depending on social determinants of health as well as the genes. So I'd like to maybe get your perspective as to, talking about as the healthcare is advancing, how will the social determinants as well as the, now the discovery of genes and how we are able to really get down to very specifics will really change where we are.
Current, but up until now, our belief is being, and the evidence suggests, that about 20% of diseases that we get is determined by our genes, and about 80% or so is the environment. Some of that is external environment, some of it is our lifestyle. So it's about 20-80, you might argue it's 30. I actually think the genetic variable part is higher, and there are two reasons for that, I believe. One is, we all know the human genome was sequenced, or we were told the human genome was sequenced about 20 years ago. It's a major breakthrough, etc. Actually, that turned out only to be partially true. Why do I say that? Are there any mathematicians and statisticians in the room? Okay. When the Genome Project was done at that time, 20 to 30 years ago when it was funded, the ability for computational power was relatively limited. And so when the genomes were being sequenced, it was code. When that code was being sequenced, they didn't know at the time what was background noise and what was actually truly individual sequences that were genetic code. Okay? Any biologists in the room? All right, maybe a few. So arbitrarily, they looked at the ability to do computation and they said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to identify everything that is above a certain number of base pairs, and they picked the number 300, which is about 100 amino acids. Anything smaller than that, we're going to count as noise. Everything else will count as real code, because they didn't have the capacity mathematically to go beyond that. Come 20 years later, we now find out that in the human genome, about 20% of the entire human genome is actually all that so-called noise. Well, it's probably not noise. There's a lot of important regulatory signals in there. So that assumption of minority of our disease process being external to genome is based on some of those assumptions. So one of that is being corrected. That has now gone back. We have the computational power to correct that. That's going to create a whole new field of what I call regulatory genetic signals, small peptides that actually have a very important role. I don't want to get too technical with this audience, but that's important. The second reason I believe this is that we actually, and this is where my companies work and the reason I took this on, is we, at the age of 60, have the same genetic code as the day we were born. So it hasn't changed. Our genes don't change as we get older. But yet, our cells don't behave the same as we were when we were young. So the question really is, if you're a 2-year-old baby and you lose a cell, you replace it like that. But when you're 60, you have a loss of a cell, you don't replace it. Why not? The genetic code is there. What is wrong with that genetic code? And what we're now learning is there's a whole system in our cells that are designed to read that genetic code, and the dysfunction is not in the genetic code, but the ability to read it. And if we can reset that and reactivate, the cell starts to read again. Imagine a CD-ROM. I know there's some people here who aren't even old enough to remember CD-ROMs. I was going to say record players, but I won't go there. But if a CD-ROM gets scratched, the data is still in there. You can't read the data. When you repolish it, now you can read it. That's what's happening at the cellular level. As our technology allows us to do that, this whole interplay between our genetic code, our ability to interpret genetic code, and how the environment has influenced it is now opening up a new frontier in medicine. 5 years ago, we actually didn't even envision could be possible. So this is why I'm saying what is current belief is already outdated.
You know, you're talking about complex, dense scientific matters, but somehow the crowd is following you.
It's not that complicated, really.
Really interesting discussion, and I'm so grateful to you for broaching these complex topics and making them, palatable to an audience that's as varied as this. If you could take that a couple of steps further, I mean, you alluded to your worldview that the population is going to continue to get older and older, and there isn't going to be enough support amongst the, new or younger generations to support that. Take us all the way out. Now you're talking about you're going to have the ability to reset code so that people are going to be able to live even longer and longer. Take us all the way out. What's going to be the solution? How are we going to support this aging and growing population? Or is anything going to come into existence and wipe them out?
Well, I'm telling my children have lots of...
Personally. No, look, actually, it's not doomsday. I actually think the other way. If you look at Medicare, the single most expensive disease for the US in the Medicare system as a system disease, it's actually not cancer, it's Alzheimer's. If we look across the world, at age 65 onwards, the risk of Alzheimer's doubles every 5 years to 85. By 85, about 1 in 2 people have dementia. So if we don't do something about it, that's the challenge. My goal as CEO of Life Biosciences and all the work we're doing across the world now is nothing to do with living longer. There's a difference in my mind between lifespan and health span. I'm interested in health span. Can we use technology to let you live healthier even if you live just as long? But the problem right now is our medical system and our technology is used to patch you up with a Band-Aid, and you spend the last 15 years of your life in dramatic decline. By decline, I mean there's a potential right now of almost a decade of being dependent on others. And if there aren't enough young people around, who's going to take care of you? So the goal here really is to extend health span. You're going to live to be 85, you're going to live to be 85, but you don't want to be institutionalized from 70 to 85, or depending on your children, from 70 to 85. We can shrink that. Now, for the economists in the room, Bank of America did a financial model that if we could extend the healthy part of our life by just 2 years, and just live just as long, but just 2 years longer of healthy independence, the economic benefit to the US is $1 trillion. Trillion. Okay? Think of productivity, because 65 and retirement goes back to pre-war Germany. True. Right? 65 was picked because the life expectancy was 63. It's a great insurance model. Let everybody retire at 65, but most of them be gone anyway, so that's fine. Well, problem now is, this is one thing. The other thing I want to get at, and I want to throw some ethical questions to you, which is what really keeps me up at night. Let's forget the technical stuff. The parts that keep me up at night, I'll give you 2 examples. One is today we have the technology, and I'm not talking about telomeres. We have the technology to take a tissue sample of yours and tell you what your biological age is, pretty accurately. Which means if you're age 55, we can tell you whether your body is actually 45 years old or 60 years old or 65 years old. Because we know the biological age correlates much better with your life history of how you've lived it versus your actual number of years you've lived. And we all know 60-year-olds who look like they're 50 and 50-year-olds who look like they're 65. But we can biologically actually do that with precision. First ethical question. Now that that's possible, who should have access to that data? Would you want to share it with an employer? Should we give that technology to insurance companies? The next time you go for a life insurance, they just do that test. And if you've outlived your years because of your life, does your policy go up? So societal questions actually haven't got to where the technology already is. That's the one thing. The second is something I'm very passionate about my company. We are developing technologies that potentially will reverse blindness from age-related macular degeneration and glaucoma. We've already done that in animals. The scientists in the room, we just submitted a paper to Nature. It is under review, where we've taken blind mice and through gene reprogramming have actually regenerated the retina, and they have regained the ability to see. I say this on camera because the paper is already submitted. The reason I left PepsiCo as vice chairman and didn't take another big company role was the chance to lead what I think could be the most profound technology we can imagine for our era. Now, that's the technical side. We can get into more of that. The ethical question is this. Across the world, there are tens of millions of people who could benefit. Big if. I don't know if we're going to succeed in humans. It's a big journey from mice to humans. Let's just not. But the fact that it's technically now feasible, we have line of sight, we have to start thinking about the ethical issues. Think Pakistan, think India. If that technology is available, I have two business model options, in theory. I can develop $1 million gene reprogramming treatment. There may be about 1,000 to 10,000 people in the world who can afford it. And we will make a lot of money as a company and go to Wall Street and do very well. And I will have ended my career leading the world's best scientists. We have scientists at Harvard, MIT, UCLA, Salk, Albert Einstein, Virginia Tech, UVA, etc. These are all part of my ecosystem that are working with us, part of our science team. We will have taken their work, and that will be the legacy we leave. But 99.9% of the world, people who could benefit, will never have access to it. The flip side is, can we take and make this treatment for $1,000 or $100 and get 10 million people exposed to it? But in order to do that, I have to protect the integrity of my company so the company doesn't get hijacked, which is why I'm so particular on who invests in my company. I do not want investors who will not let us realize our vision and our legacy. I don't have to work. I can retire. I'm blessed, alhamdulillah, I can retire. But I'm leading this team. Let me tell you something else I'll say on camera. Because I think what we've lost is the right leaders. And very few people will say this is a Pakistani CEO. I pay myself $15 an hour because that's the minimal wage in Massachusetts. By law, I can pay myself and still be considered an employee. How many CEOs are being paid $15 an hour? And this is a Pakistani Muslim. I don't see Fox News celebrating that. However, why do I do it? You lead by example. Because to us, the mission of getting there is important. And that's why I have a passion for this. So the ethical question I ask for the sociologists in the room, the lawyers in the room, the policymakers in the room, is what will it take to protect companies like mine so that the investment community in Wall Street doesn't hijack us before we're ready? That is the biotech life health systems of the future, not of the last 2-3 decades. Yes, we'll create a lot of value, but that value will be also measured by the exposure we have around the world. And this is a new world. So thank you for your question. It's a long answer. I wanted to give you the context. Jafar.
Thank you for asking that question. My question keys off of the gentleman from the State Department pointing out the relationship between the United States and Pakistan. And this is open, so it is a Pakistani-American forum. The question is, knowing your very intimate involvement on the ground with the initiatives between the United States government and Pakistan's government, if you could talk a little bit more, give some context, as the word was used, to that speech, and put some meat on what's actually happening. We're talking on these kind of ethical questions. How is this fitting into where Pakistan's headed, and where you are driving that relationship?
So I have, relevant to that question, I have three.
I serve as the chairman of the U.S. Council on Competitiveness. I've had the privilege of taking over initially from Chad Holliday, who is the former CEO and chairman of Dow. Sam Allen is currently the chairman emeritus, the CEO of John Deere. And I'm the current sitting chairman. Again, unprecedented. A Pakistani Muslim will be chairing the U.S. Council in Washington. We work directly with the policymakers, of course, influencing. And when I took over as chairman, in my acceptance speech, we had numerous cabinet members at the audience. It was at the Carnegie Institution. And I say this because actually in my speech, this is on record and on camera, you can actually get a link to my speech. I addressed this in a global context. That's the first part of the answer to the question. We talk about the U.S. being competitive. I chair the Council on Competitiveness. I'm absolutely committed to that as the chairman. But competitiveness of the U.S. and the leadership of the U.S. is absolutely important because U.S. is the only society, if you look back the last 100 years plus, that the term I like to use and I've used is we are the only country that has democratized technology. As we've developed technology, we've made it available to every citizen on the planet. The internet, the aviation industry, the automotive industry. I can go on and give you lots of examples. China, Asia, did not invent the internet. The US federal government did. They opened it up to the world. And so the Alibabas, the AI, all of that is happening on the back of those technologies. We didn't control it. I cannot say that that would be the case for every other government who is now trying to rise. If they had control of these next generation technologies, would they open it up to the world? It is important for the US to remain the leader and competitive for the sake of the world. Nothing to do with defense and wars, but because most technologies that are being used, cell phones, around the world, where do you think cell phones were discovered? Actually, not too far from here. Remember Bell Labs, transistors, etc. So one is that. The second, where I distinguish from some of my predecessors, is US leadership and competitiveness is not about winning at the cost of others. It is about winning and bringing everybody else along as we've always done. And the narrative has to remain the US will lead, the US will compete, but it is not at the expense of others. It is actually to the benefit of the rest of the world to come along with us. That's a very important difference. And hence, coming back to your question, this is part of the speech I gave in Washington. The second, as chairman of the US-Pakistan Business Council, which is not in Pakistan, this is in the US Chamber of Commerce. So it's a US-based body where we look at trade between US companies. We are looking for those new models for US companies to do business in Pakistan, but a new model. Let me give an example of that. We just launched, in collaboration with Gilead, which discovered the hepatitis C drug, Abbott Laboratories from here in Chicago, Feroz Sons in Pakistan, we launched an initiative around screening and treating for hepatitis C in the field. The first company to actually do that in the private sector in Pakistan was PepsiCo, and I signed and led that initiative as the first initiative of the private sector partnering in Pakistan. That pilot led to this initiative that was now announced by Sania Nishtar. And so that was in collaboration with 2 US corporations and a Pakistani company. This will continue. Those are the models. Now, what Gilead is doing is actually providing the hepatitis C drug as a branded generic. At generic prices, but a branded drug. That's huge. Because now you can, as a Pakistani consumer, trust that this is a branded, American-branded drug at a local generic price. That is the difference. That requires private-public collaboration, and kudos also to the Pakistan government who actually helped enable that. The potential is huge. So, other questions?
We could go on forever, but I think it was just the last question which I'm going to have Naved take.
So this is a little bit of a curveball. So
I love curveballs.
Okay, so something like 30% or to up to 60% of all the effects of drugs are, according to science papers, can be attributed to placebo effect. But there's some research from Harvard on some factors that increase the actual effect of the placebo. And also just from other research, we're seeing the effect of level of stresses impact health outcomes, physical health outcomes, and also impact the epigenetic structure, especially when stress is induced like at early age. Maybe tell about your experience, interplays, and how the mind part can potentially increase the health outcomes
Got it.
itself.
So your question reminds me of a broader statement I make when I teach leadership to graduate students, usually at business schools. You know, you can become very successful in your career without ever having to come up with any good ideas. I absolutely believe that. I'm a perfect living example of that. All you have to do is recognize good ideas. A leader is not about knowing the subject or indeed having to come up with the ideas. Why do I say that? I don't actually have any experience directly myself. The first question is, what's your experience? I have none. But most things I've talked about, I have no personal experience.
Untrue.
That's true. Okay? All you have to do is surround yourself with really smart people and recognize who they are and give them the chance to actually implement and execute what their good ideas about. Now, think about what you just said. 60% is placebo, which by definition means 40% is the effect of the drug. I'm just going to use your statistics. Well, if I went to you as a patient and I said, well, I won't treat you because only 60% of the effect is 60% of the effect is placebo and only 40% will work, which means 40% will continue to get worse, 60% will get better because of placebo. Would you want to come back to see me as a doctor? Probably not, because 40% is a hell of a treatment effect. So first of all, let's not discount what you just said. So now on the placebo side, since we today have not got the ability to predict which one is going to be placebo and which one's not, we've got to treat everybody. That's just the nature of therapy. And as we got better and better at technology, that 40% gets bigger and bigger. Antibiotics is a good example. If you've got a viral infection, antibodies aren't going to do anything. But if you have a strep throat and is positive, I suspect it's not a 60% placebo. It's probably 90-some% therapeutic. So it's a generalized statement, but there's more precision. Precision medicine will help. We just haven't figured out how to actually implement that yet. It'll come. We talked about that earlier. The third part of your question is very powerful. Modern society and the stress environment we live in does shorten life. We know that. We've actually got lots of biological evidence that stress not only hurts you, but shortens your life expectancy. We always knew that, but now we're actually learning the mechanisms behind it, which raises two different questions. If we know the mechanism and we could actually intervene biologically, pharmacologically, which is better? Take the stress away or just take a pill? Knowing Western society, we'll just go take a pill. You know, it's a bit like weight loss. You can lose weight, but find me a pill to lose weight.
Sure.
Right? I always say there's no overweight people in a refugee camp, regardless of their genes. Right? I'm an endocrinologist. So you take the food away, all your genetics suddenly get in line and you lose weight. And your metabolism suddenly changes. Well, that's the reality is, you know what the reality is. So stress is part of that. But let me end on, a lot of it, in my opinion, is self-induced. Why do I say that? I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but how many of you have your cell phone next to your bed?
Be honest.
Let's be honest. How many of you hear it ting through the night? How many of you
Keep your hands
wake
up.
up The first thing you do is look at your screen. Okay?
Look.
Last thing you do at bed, look at your screen. First thing you do, look at your screen. Throughout the day, it's not like, 20 years ago, for those of us who were working, the world wasn't working. But now all of a sudden, that's stress. Because your mind is constantly trying to wire behind, I wonder what's going on. And by the way, let me remind you, the world never sleeps because there's 24 hours a day, and somewhere in the world, it's 9 a.m., it's time to get up. And so we self-induce most of this. And the pills and pharmaceutical industry and healthcare is not the solution. It is ourselves. We can do that. And yet, as soon as your child becomes 6 or 7 years old, what's the first thing you do? You start giving them these devices. They're 2-year-olds now, and they're doing this and this. So you know what? We got to take care of it. Thank you very much for your questions. It's been a delight.
I think a keynote speaker that really messes with the minds. And this gentleman has certainly done so, right? Some may question, what does the topics that we talked about, what does it have to do with entrepreneurship, which was the focus of our conference? And I'd say everything to do with that. Because what are we doing in entrepreneurship? We're trying to articulate that which has not been articulated yet, and then we are trying to solve big problems. And certainly, over the past hour, the plethora of topics that we dealt with has given you, hopefully, keen insights into lots of things and triggered thoughts, had you rethink and reframe the way you have been approaching problems. And I am beyond words. I typically end these conversations by trying to recap, but this man makes it extremely difficult to do so, so I won't even attempt this. But I want you to just join me once again to thank Mahmood Khan, who didn't really need to be here. And I think what I really admire about him is that he actually means what he said about paying forward. I know his schedule, and on our request, he came and joined us here, and I'm indebted to you, Mahmood, for doing so.
How could I say no to Chicago? I have so many
There
friends
you
here.
go. I knew there was an angle there. I think Mahmood is going to stay with us during the day. Through lunch, he's here, and please come in and talk with them, and thank you once again very much.
And just a quick announcement, and I'm going to ask my friend Ed to come up. So please do not forget to sign up for mentorship. We have a lot of great mentors out there.
Ready? Yes. Okay. My name is Mahmood Khan. I'm the CEO of Life Biosciences, and I was the keynote speaker here today at Open Chicago 2019. It was a true pleasure. We've had a great meeting so far, amazing stimulative discussions, and I would highly recommend those of you who are not members to actually come and join the organization, go online to the Chicago Open website and become a member. Most importantly, engage, participate. This is the forum where you can find mentorship, sharing of ideas, and most importantly, be inspired. Thank you very much. You got it?
Hi, my name is Kaiwan Khawaja, and I'm a former Open Global President. I'm visiting from Boston at this annual event of Open Chicago. It's a great opportunity for the Pakistani American diaspora to connect to entrepreneurs and academicians and scientists and engineers from all over the US who are visiting at this annual event. And I would encourage people to join Open Chicago, to network with us, and to talk about new business opportunities, new business models, new ways in which you need mentorship. If you would like to join Open Chicago, please visit open-chicago.org to get more information, and hopefully we'll welcome you with open arms. Thank you.
That's quadrupled in productivity, and that's growing. But the only talks that I'm ever asked to do outside of my sector are on women's issues. And while I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak about women's issues, It's just, it's a frustrating space to be in. And that's not what I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about my frustration. I want to talk about the work that I'm doing, which is really, really revolutionary. So in any case, I'm not going to beat you guys up because you're actually here, right? So I'd love to tell you a little bit more about my company. My company is called EcoEnergy. My background is that I'm an environmental lawyer. My specialization is in energy and international business. I started my career at the World Bank. I worked in the Africa energy sector, and I also worked for the Global Environment Facility. While I was there, I had the privilege of working on a project for a group called Grameen Shakti. Grameen Shakti, if you're not familiar, is a subsidiary of the Grameen Bank. Grameen Bank, founded by Muhammad Yunus, who won the Nobel Prize in 2006, and came up with the term microfinance. They went back to their microfinance customers in Bangladesh and they said, what else do you need in order to thrive, in order to get opportunities for economic development? And they said, we need access to basic electricity. So while I was working on this project at the World Bank, I remember thinking to myself, Pakistan is very similar geographically, demographically. Do they have a model, a financially sustainable and scalable business model that we can replicate in Pakistan? So I left a very lucrative job at the World Bank to go and explore this. I did a fellowship with Grameen Shakti where I went to Pakistan in 2008, and I did field work to see, is anybody working to bring energy access to areas in Pakistan that are off-grid and under-electrified? So Pakistan, as you probably all know, has about 210 million people, and there are 65 million people that have zero electricity access, and there are 71 million more that are under-electrified. So think about what that does to the ability of a country to develop economically, right? There's really a lack of opportunity there, and it's not for lack of talent. So one thing I uncovered is that, you know, people that are at the bottom of the pyramid, there's obviously a very uphill battle for them to climb if they don't have access to basic energy. But beyond that, there's actually a pretty lucrative business opportunity here too, to reach a large percentage of the population if I can figure out how to make clean energy, solar energy, affordable to this population. And so that's what I've been working on for the past 10 years. I started first a group called EcoEnergy Finance. The mission of EcoEnergy Finance was to understand who this off-grid and under-electrified population was, and understand if they're going to adopt a new technology, what sort of behavioral shift is required, what their purchasing power was, and what's the right product market fit for these various segments of the population. And so I put together a skeletal team, raised some money. We did surveys across 44,000 homes and businesses and collected data. Now I have a co-founder, his name is Jeremy Higgs. He's Australian, but he's been living in Pakistan for the last 11 years, speaks Urdu fluently, married to a Pakistani, has a baby, and knows how to drive in Karachi. So he's an honorary Pakistani, right? So with him there overseeing management, and with me as the CEO raising visibility and investment money, we set about trying to collect data from this population to see what we could understand around product market fit, purchasing power, and consumer preferences. So we sold 25,000 products, off-grid solar products, and then we started speaking with the government. Because the thing is that the way that energy access, the way that electricity reaches each and every one of you, the way that energy access unfolded in the developed world is that the governments, the US government decided to subsidize the building of power plants and then the spreading of these power lines to homes no matter how remote. This is a government subsidized problem, right? But just because that's how energy access has unfolded in the past in developed countries doesn't mean that we have to do it that way anymore. In fact, having access to the technology that we do now and the resources that we do now, there's much better ways. We can build a new technology off of the back of mobile technology. Now, you guys, many of you have come of age at the time when nobody used cell phones to the time that everybody uses cell phones. Do you know more people have cell phones in this world than have toothbrushes? And my customers in Pakistan are no exception. No matter how remote or rural the place that they live in, they all have cell phones. There's many different uses. It's not like they're all on Facebook, although many of them are. They're using it for really important things. Farmers are trying to figure out, I have a crop, where am I going to get the greatest yield for my crop? So we spent 7 years doing market research, collecting that data. My business partner and co-founder, Jeremy, has a background in IT and software development. Then we spent 4 years market building, testing different products that existed, and deciding where we wanted to sit on the value chain. We decided that the best place to be is going to be not in the design of these products, not in the manufacturing of these products, but more in the distribution of these products. We wanted to sit close to customers where we understood their consumer preferences. We have an IT platform through which we do billing, management, and then we own our own part of the value chain. So we do everything from marketing to a customer identification to sales to installation to financing of these products. We went in 1 year from just testing this model from 200 customers to 8,000 customers. That's a huge jump. It's a huge jump. Beyond that, so once I had proven the model, we had 200 customers, we had an over 85% repayment rate, and we had a product that we knew that there was a demand for. Then I launched EcoEnergy Global. EcoEnergy Global is a fully for-profit company. The purpose of the company is to generate a financial return for its investors, and it also obviously has a great social and environmental impact because it's promoting solar energy in a country that has very high solar irradiation. So now the next step for us is to figure out how can we use the foundation that we've built. We're about to get 2 great government contracts. One is for 10,000 new customers in Punjab, and another one is with the World Bank, where I used to work, with the government of Sindh, to electrify 200,000 more customers over the next 5 years. I'm very ambitious. We want to go even further. So now I've figured out if EcoEnergy goes into a town or village, urban, peri-urban, rural, it really doesn't matter, and there's 100 people in that village, and 30 of them have an EcoEnergy product. What about the rest of the 70 people? I want to be able to electrify them too, not because they're poor and I feel sorry for them, but just because we can now use technology to electrify them as well. And this is what I'm going to be giving my TED Talk about. How can you take things that are expensive and make them affordable? How can you take things that have traditionally been the purview of either the government or the private sector and can really only go into the hands of the few people that can afford it? How can you take something like an Uber model where you have an asset that's maybe too expensive for everybody to afford, and how can you use the power of the sharing economy for other people to get the privilege to borrow that asset? So basically what I'm talking about is if I go into a village and there's 100 people, 30 people have an EcoEnergy solar home system, and 70 people don't, by slapping a meter in their homes that costs $6.90, I can use an app, and in real time, these people can now borrow the excess electricity, providing a revenue stream for the person that's invested into the asset, the solar home system, and the people that now are on my network can in real time push a button on their app the same way that you call an Uber and say, I want to watch a cricket game today, I need a little bit more power. So I'm going to, for a fraction of the cost, I'm going to buy power from my neighbor who has excess capacity. It's a really revolutionary concept. And I'm very excited to be working to patent this technology where we can, in real time, somebody with an Istri business can be like, I need 3 hours of power right now. And they can order it on their phone. It comes from their neighbor's now made money, the same way an Uber driver makes money, right? And for a fraction of the cost, the same way that for a fraction of the cost of renting or owning the car, you now just get the lowest common denominator, the unit that you want, which is what? The ride. I just want the power. I don't need to own the utility, right? I just want this small unit. How can I just get access to that for a fraction of the cost. So we're very excited. We're going to be patenting and then licensing this technology to other markets outside of Pakistan, but we're super excited to be testing it out in Pakistan, where there's, 141 million people that are under-electrified or don't have access to any electricity? That's crazy. What a great opportunity, right? Yeah. So anyway, that's what my company does. I have plenty to say about women and lack of opportunity for women, but I wanted to just get that out of the way and just tell you that even though I'm a woman, I have something super exciting and technologically innovative to tell you. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, Shazia. I'm taken by your approach to looking at a social issue and finding a solution, and that's really what we're getting at today, is how do you use the entrepreneurial acumen to address social issues? And as a woman entrepreneur, as much as I know, that's not the reason why we're talking to you alone
Hey, I'm
today.
still grateful for you, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here.
You know, I want to reflect, though, a lot of people in this room, I think, want to do more for Pakistan, and they want to use entrepreneurship as a vehicle to do that. But looking at your role, you've created jobs both in the United States and in Pakistan. As an entrepreneur reflecting on that journey, what are things that you wish you had known when you started out, and what are maybe one or two things you might have done differently?
I think that my challenge really hasn't been accessing the funding that I need, and I have not raised to the level of obviously some of the very successful people here, but I've raised some millions of dollars. What I wish that I could have done was done it in a much more efficient way. So I feel like there are opportunities, vehicles like this, open, global, open, APF. There's a huge and very, very successful diaspora community that you all comprise. You know, so these forums can be used as a vehicle to find opportunities to invest in a country like Pakistan. So if there was a more organized way for me to find capital, I think I could have ramped up even more quickly. So I would say that if groups like Open, APF, and any of the other diaspora institutions sort of got together and then collectively agreed on 3 issues that they wanted to move the needle on. And I already know what they are because you're all Desi. I know. It's education, healthcare, right? And I would suggest energy access because it's the foundation pretty much for everything and anything else, right? So if we decided collectively that we want to move the needle on these 3 issues, and then Open, instead of asking people for money, for contributions, created a fund, an investment fund, set the criteria, and the criteria was, say they decided that they had investors that fit into 4 different categories. One is, I want to make an equity investment. I'll make it into entrepreneurs that are going to move the needle and have impact and measurable, quantifiable outcomes across these 3 things that I care about: education, healthcare, and energy. And I'm an equity investor. I know that there's a social and environmental impact. I want a return. I want a significant financial return. Well, there's lots of companies that are working in Pakistan right now, mine included, that can give you that. Another category would be, I want to lend. Maybe I don't care about Islamic financing, maybe I do. I want to be a lender and I want a good interest rate. Like, that's what I want. Okay, well, there's definitely people that are working in these 3 sectors that you care about who can have an impact, and there's an opportunity there for you, with my company included. Another category would be, I want to lend money, but I'm not, 0% interest is okay with me. I'm looking not for a handout, I'm looking for a hand up. I want to catalyze development and growth. Well, there's definitely people doing work that can give you that opportunity as well. And then finally, well, I've already made my money. I'm a traditional philanthropist. I just want to know that my money will be very effectively deployed. There's a place for you too to give an enormous financial, maybe not financial, but a social and environmental impact by going to people that are at the bottom of the pyramid. So if I had access to networks that had created a fund and said, these are the 4 different categories under which I can invest, and we're now and Open set up the fund, took money in, were vetted, set their own criteria and vetted potential entrepreneurs or enterprises to get access to this funding, they could then say, they could take an administrator's fee and actually figure out a way to make money so that Open doesn't have to be nonprofit anymore. Maybe they can take a fee for administering this fund. Anyway, sorry, Radhika, that was
No,
a
it's
long
large-
answer too.
No, it gives me a lot to think about. I think
Yeah.
when we're looking at raising funding, I know you kind of were modest in how much money you've raised for your company, and when I've heard you speak in the past, you've referenced sort of a strategic approach to raising capital. And I think any entrepreneur, whether woman or man, is looking at how do I raise more money for my company if that's the route they're going to take to growth. Can you talk a little bit about what that capital raising was like for you? Because I was taken with your methodology and how you approached the issue of raising capital.
I really broke down. Well, a lot of times people assume that if you're a woman and you wear pink pants, that you must be heading some sort of NGO, right? And while I definitely care about social impact, I'm also a businesswoman. So what I did was I had to break down potential investors into those 4 categories and figure out, who are the people and what are they interested in getting. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to raise money for your company, what you really need to figure out is, first, is this person aligned with you? Are they vision aligned with you? Do they care about what your company is trying to achieve? Are they going to be a good strategic investor for you? And I know that entrepreneurs feel like they're so desperate for money that they'll take it from anyone, but I would highly encourage you not to do that. It's really important that you, as the last panelist said, find investors that are going to protect your intellectual property, find investors that are going to be strategically in line with you and help you to scale up. So it's not just about the money. There's dumb money and then there's smart money. You might need some dumb money to get you started, right? And that's okay. Those would be maybe your friends or your family or institutional investors who have a mandate around whatever you're working on, right? But definitely do your homework, do your research, figure out who you're talking to, and then don't just think about what you want from them. Think about what value you could add for them. Think about what they are looking for from you. What stage of life are they in? What can they do? What can they not do? A lot of my money has come, 50% of my money has come from women, by the way. But yeah. So I'm very, very happy and proud about that. You really need to figure out where is this person at. A lot of my investment has come from young professionals who are really looking to make, who are patient, they can wait for like a 5 to 7 year exit. Somebody else might just be really interested in the social mission of your work. Somebody else might be really interested in a quick exit so they can give you the debt that you need. So really understand who your potential investor is, and do your homework before you go in.
Well, I guess flipping it around, I sit, on the government side, asking questions of entrepreneurs about how we can better policy to meet the needs of women on the ground. And last week I was at the UN General Assembly. We met with Dr. Sania Nishtar about the government of Pakistan's ASAS initiative. It's essentially looking at how the private sector can more strategically engage in the question of development. And when you're speaking right now, you're talking there's a lot of nuance involved in what you're saying and a lot of mapping. But from the government side where capacity is, there's limited capacity, where only so many people working on this issue, what advice would you have to policymakers looking at how to pull the private sector in to address something like women's entrepreneurship? What is sort of a message that you think people should hear?
I think there's a lot of opportunity for public and private partnerships around this. There's a lot of people in this audience who are business owners. If you could engage with policy experts and come up with sort of frameworks for how you can promote a more inclusive policy for women, I can give you a couple of examples of things that we've done at EcoEnergy that could be integrated into like the culture in a lot of these private sector companies, and I don't know, perhaps there's some support that can be given from the public sector and policy analysts as well. But basically, the problem in Pakistan around female entrepreneurship, not female entrepreneurship, just around women in the workforce is that it's a global problem. There's a reason why women are dropping out of the workforce at a certain period in their life, and you all know what it is. It's that you feel like really torn between having a family, giving your time to your family, and staying in the workforce. And I feel that if there's a lot to be lost there, right? Because women are half of the world's population. They're half of the talent pool. They're half of the world's great ideas. And if we could put simple accommodations in place, then it would make it easier for them to not have to choose between work life and family life. I face this myself. I've been married for 15 years. I have 2 kids. I launched Eco Energy when I was pregnant with my youngest, and I travel to Pakistan probably 5 times a year, and to some very scary places. So I had to figure out how am I going to, luckily I have a very supportive family, but I want to include, I've got about 112 employees on the ground in Pakistan. And inevitably I lose women year after year, and it's always the same reason. A fresh graduate, super talented, super motivated, I got married, my husband doesn't want me to work. My in-laws don't want me to work. Or my husband was really supportive, he's a professional too, but now I'm having kids and my in-laws don't want me to work. How do we navigate this? It's not just a Pakistani woman problem, it's not just a US woman, it's a global problem, right? So some things that we've done at Eco Energy is that first we allow everybody the opportunity to work remotely. Everybody, men and women. And it's really good because it cuts down on a lot of my costs, right? I don't have to have a big fancy office where I have to pay a jaiwala and a secretary and get furniture and plants and this and that. I let everybody work remotely, and it doesn't matter to me how many hours they put in. Their productivity is much more important to me. So I think a lot more women would be able to manage this and to work at your company if companies had policies that allowed for a lot more remote working opportunities. And this would work for men better too, because it would allow them to be at home a lot more and give women the support that they need. You have gender parity in a lot of European and Scandinavian countries because there's been a public-private partnership. Private sector companies and the government really require that men have paternity leave as well as women having maternity leave. Why? Because women are not being squeezed on both ends. My husband has probably texted me 45 different times just while I've been here to ask me about my kids' soccer games. It's like, I'm not here, I'm not there. Deal with it yourself, man. I can't do that and do this. You know what I mean? But so one thing that we allow people to do is we allow everybody to work remotely. The next thing that we allow, that we really encourage is opportunities for visibility for women who, the women who stick around in the company, we want to give them opportunities for upward mobility and visibility, opportunities to connect with both male and female mentors. There's not as many female mentors as I'd like, so if you're interested, definitely our team needs you. I would also say the same thing to the men in the audience. Women really need mentors, and they need to be able to expand their network. Another challenge that women really have, particularly when it comes to raising money, is that one issue that I have is that when I go to raise money, it's largely in part based on your own personal network. And women have more limited personal networks because all the women go to one side of the room and all the men go into the other side of the room in every single event, right? Or every single social event. So I have to raise money. If I'm raising money from a woman, I almost inevitably always have to have at least 3 to 5 conversations with her husband too to make sure that what she's doing is okay. And if I'm raising money from a man, then I definitely have to have his wife over for brunch and talk to her. So it takes me twice the amount of time to raise the same amount of money because raising money relies on relationship building, and you need to cultivate a relationship with both men and women if you're a female founder. But so some of the things that we've done is give more positions of visibility, provide mentorship opportunities, allow everybody to work remotely.
Thank you. One of the things we're doing on the council is working with some of the largest multinational corporations in Pakistan to talk about policies and effective programs that companies can work towards, including how to engage men as caregivers in homes as a way to enable economic growth. So that was actually really excellent to hear some of those recommendations. I want to just turn to the audience for a second to ask if you have any questions. Yeah.
Your cause is so great, so novel, so good. I don't think we should have generally such respect or sometimes to the men and women. I know it's not right for the women to participate as much as they can, but men should have similar input into it.
Absolutely, absolutely right. Yeah.
Pakistan and other rural areas myself, and actually when I hear from you and what are the ideas that I hear from you, I think those are the most brilliant ideas I've heard to tackle the problem in this field. And so kudos to you for that. one problem that we tend to have with solar is obviously we have the issue at night. So an alternative could be the wind energy, and the other alternative is battery storage, which tends to be pretty expensive. Have you thought about how to tackle those areas, like having energy at night, or any other ideas other than solar?
Other renewables certainly have their place. The cost of solar has gone down something like 80% in the last decade. So for me, it's critically important that I have a product that I can make affordable to my customers, either by financing it for them, or they can buy it as a one-off, but it has to be affordable. All of the units that we deploy do have a battery in them, and so we have the capacity to run our products at night. So we run so we've got systems that are 50 watts, 250 watts, 340 watts, all the way up to 1 kilowatt. And we increase the size of the panel, and we correspondingly increase the size of the battery's capacity.
As someone who's done solar development in Pakistan and wind development in Pakistan, the fact that you've gone to the rural areas and small places is remarkable, because it's very hard, just as a practical matter, getting there, talking to people. I'm curious how you are solving the credit problem, the payment problem. So if 30% of the people have paid somehow for this equipment, then the other 70% who are going to use that service, it's okay to say, yeah, I'll buy it, but how do they actually, in the real world, get paid and know that they're going to get paid?
That is such a great question, and I'm going to tell you, that is such a great question, I'm going to tell you exactly how. So in my experience over the last 10 years, this was a big issue for us, because originally what we did was we figured out when we collected data from people that they couldn't afford to buy this technology. The only way they could afford it was if we financed it for them, broke it down into affordable monthly installments. That created a problem for me because I'm sending my team out and they're going and collecting cash payments. Everybody knows that they have money. They get mugged several times. One of the retailers that we worked with got killed over his cell phone. This was a very big problem. We have to figure out a way we have to finance it, or it's not affordable for people. And we have to figure out a way to finance it where we have an enforcement mechanism for repayment, and we can be assured that we're going to get paid. So what we did was, in 2013, this technology became available. It's called pay-go technology, pay-as-you-go technology. What it means is that inside, what the solar home system looks like is that there's a panel that goes on your roof, and then for your home or your business, you have a control unit. There's a battery in there. There's also a GSM chip in there. All of our customers pay us digitally. It took us a year to teach all of our customers to pay us digitally. So now what they do is they go to a local EasyPesa or MobiCash agent. They give that guy cash. That guy sends EcoEnergy the payment digitally. EcoEnergy automatically sends a text message to the customer that says, you've paid your EcoEnergy utility bill for this month. This is how much credit you've unlocked. And then we can remotely unlock a corresponding amount of electricity to their system. And if they don't pay, we can shut it off. So we can turn it on and off remotely. Yeah. I didn't invent this technology, but I will take credit for deploying it and being the first to deploy it in Pakistan. Yeah.
You didn't run afoul of banking regulations?
No. I mean, we are acting like a bank in the fact that we're financing something for our customers. Now, what I would really like to do is offload the financing component to somebody else. It would definitely help my balance sheet and make my company a lot more scalable. But the financial, like the microfinance institutions in Pakistan, there's a lot of sort of like laborious regulation around it. So they haven't stopped us. They're happy. In fact, we've partnered with several microfinance institutions. UBank is one that we just signed a deal with. They're the fastest growing microfinance bank in Pakistan. The microfinance banks actually want to collaborate with us because we have a much deeper reach, particularly in rural communities, than they do. They have a bank maybe that's set up in every rural area, but my customers don't want to shut down their business, go submit an application, undergo the scrutiny of the bank, and then wait for a week to find out if they're eligible or not for a loan to buy this service. So we've been financing all of these customers off of our own balance sheet. But UBank, What they want to do is they want living. There's really like the unit economics still work. It could be better, but there's still very much a business case to be made for energy access in this country. And then third was the enabling environment, and it scored lower, but it scored 79, which is still pretty high. And so the other thing that I would say is that Pakistan has really improved on a lot of different fronts. You guys probably know that Morgan Stanley upgraded it from a frontier market to an emerging economy on their index. Also, the World Bank Ease of Doing Business report, which I think you alluded to probably, Pakistan jumped 11 spots. I think that politically, the handover, 2 times in a row to a democratically elected government is a pretty big deal in the short history of the country. Like, I think that that's something to be proud of. So the country is improving. And then I think finally, most excitingly, is this current administration's interest in eliminating red tape for businesses for companies that want to do business in Pakistan. And I think that it's more than talk. Like, I definitely feel like they've reached out to us and tried to eliminate red tape, found us liaisons so that we could do business in Pakistan, do better business in Pakistan without having to do, there's still a lot of red tape, but it's getting better. And the fact that they're acknowledging and identifying it as a problem means that it's going to get better and better to do business in Pakistan. And then finally, I want to say that in my sector, the most exciting things have been that for years and years and years, we had to prove that just having huge solar projects, that's not the only way to electrify the country. In fact, that's the most expensive way to electrify the country. Now there's smaller, decentralized, distributed units that can be set up straight on people's businesses that can give them the capacity that they need. So why wouldn't we use that? And while it was a bit of a battle, now the World Bank and the government of Sindh have come up with a program together, and it's a $30 million project. So the government itself is starting to take a leadership role, even down to provincial governments, to say, actually, maybe this is a cheaper and faster way. It takes on average 9 years to get connected to the grid. That might not seem like a long time, but that's a kid's lifetime, right? That's a lifetime for somebody. So you can do this in a much cheaper way. Why? Why is this available now? Because of mobile technology. And when people say to me, oh, well, that's not really going to be the way forward. We have to electrify so many people. This is such a small solution. Well, that's like somebody saying, well, your cell phone's really cute, but you should really wait for the infrastructure for a landline to be built to your house. How antiquated does that sound? Why wouldn't you use technology to leapfrog forward and bring down the cost of something and make it accessible to a much, much wider swath of people? So I hope that answered your question.
Let's take one last one.
Yes, I was going to. Did you have a question? Oh, yep, Rashid.
Really phenomenal project, congratulations, very uplifting. So several years ago, I was doing some research on cooking needs in Pakistan, and I was dumbfounded by, I don't know the exact statistics anymore, but a very, very large population is still cooking by collecting wood.
Yes.
And with the deforestation issues and all the other environmental concerns that we have, that was part of it, and of course, women were spending hours and hours of their day just collecting wood or buying wood. It was a big portion of their daily budget, actually, to buy wood. And of course, you're addressing the energy need when it comes to electricity. Have you thought about the energy need for cooking and what solar can play, perhaps not the panels, but solar cookers and whatnot, but is there a correlation here? I'm assuming it's the same consumer that you're addressing. So is there a parallel, and is there any work that you know of, or are you thinking about it that may lead to cooking needs as well?
So Shazia, before you answer that question, I want to see if we can actually take 2 questions at the same time. Did you want to ask a question also? Yeah. Thanks.
First and foremost, I have to say you did a masterful job of commanding this room to attention. So thank you for that. The second thing I wanted to ask is that you said that you've gone to a lot of rural area literacy around environmental issues and renewable energy as a hindrance, and how did you overcome that? Because that's pretty much the principle of your business. So if you can talk to talk about that a little bit.
Both excellent questions. I'll take the second one first. So we focus on a rural market, we focus on a peri-urban market, and we also focus on an urban market. I would say that maybe 20% of our business is bottom of the pyramid, and we don't tackle them through our business. We tackle them through a nonprofit. China have begun to plateau and slow down their growth, but Pakistan hasn't. It continues to grow astronomically. And as was alluded to earlier, there's a huge youth bulge where I think 2/3 of the population is under the age of 30. These people are really, really going to need access to economic opportunities. They're going to need, these people could really become a liability, or this could really be an opportunity. This could be a turning point. If we could figure out a way to employ them, and if we could figure out simultaneously a way to turn Pakistan, with its massively growing population, onto a clean energy trajectory and using technology leapfrog ahead, this could be a really great opportunity for Pakistan to be a role model in this regard. The gentleman, he was talking about sort of the opportunity cost, women going out, spending 8-9 hours a day collecting fuel wood, firewood, has greatly contributed to deforestation. It absolutely has. We need to figure out a way to offer a, they don't necessarily, the people that I'm going out and meeting in these rural areas, they don't necessarily care about the environment the way that we think about it, but they do know that there's massive flooding, the flooding is getting worse and worse, it's getting more difficult to deal with, and that it probably has something to do with erosion and deforestation. They do know that. The challenge is, how do we make them care about it? We have to figure out a way to provide them with a compelling value proposition where adopting solar, it's requiring a massive behavioral shift on their part, right? They've been living a certain way. Even all of us, like electricity has only really been available for like 100 years, right? So this is a massive change. These are just the last group of people that haven't been reached by this change yet. So we're trying to figure out, how do we take this last 1.2 billion people on Earth that don't have energy access, and how do we make it accessible to them? And how do we do it in a way that, really factors in climate change, right? How are we going to make clean energy technology accessible to them? So if we have to figure out a way to come up with a drop-in solution that's more affordable than what status quo is for them. So right now, Pakistanis spend $2.1 billion a year on kerosene. Did you know that? Isn't that a lot? That's a lot. That was shocking to me. That's a lot of money. And unlike other countries, it's not subsidized, which is great. The Pakistani government doesn't subsidize it, so it's very expensive. So don't all use it, but enough people use it. So if I can figure out a way to find those people that are spending $2 billion a year on kerosene and say, well, that's a perpetual fuel cost that you will always have to pay. But if you buy a solar home system and once you pay it off, then there is no fuel cost because it's the sun. And the system lasts anywhere from 5 to 7 years. So actually there's savings that you accrue. So we have to figure out a sort of like a compelling value proposition that makes sense for people to adopt this in order to get them to adopt it. Like, it really has to make sense for their pocketbook, because
Yes. No, thank you. I think we might be out of time and on to our next speaker, but sorry, I think she was addressing it. Yeah, so I just want to close out the panel and thank everyone for participating and asking such interesting questions. And I know Shazia will be here for the rest of the conference, so if you have any questions that you would like to ask that you didn't get a chance to, she'll be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for having me. And thank you, Radhika.
By the way, I know sometimes people do ask, it is absolutely halal food. And our lunch is going to be right next door, so just out the door on the right. And we have a 45-minute lunch break. And please don't go away after that, because at 1:15, you've got a whole other program that starts. Thank you. We'll see you guys at 1:15.